My name is Elena. I'm 35 years old, 35 weeks pregnant, and doing my best to keep life steady for my 5-year-old daughter, Maya, in Denver, Colorado. 35 weeks means I'm in the 8th month. Hospital bag packed, my OB's number on the fridge. Kick counts every evening, but still about 5 weeks from my due date if everything goes as expected. We live with my in-laws in a 2-story house near Sloan's Lake, the kind of quiet block where sprinklers tick at dusk and neighbors wave, whether they know you or not. My own parents died in a highway accident years ago, and the empty space they left still shapes the way I make decisions. I choose steadiness over drama, safety over pride. After Maya was born, we moved in to save for a starter home while Travis helped grow his family's construction supply business on Federal Boulevard, and somehow the temporary arrangement hardened into the way things are. Harold, my father-in-law, is a decent man whose silence lands softer than most people's speeches. He notices things, how I switch sides on the couch when my hips ache, how Maya traces the stitching on her backpack when she's nervous, and he acts without fanfare, leaving an extra pillow, turning down the TV, offering to fill the car before my prenatal appointments. Marisol, my mother-in-law, notices things too, but in a way that makes me brace. She loves fast and defends faster, especially when the subject is her daughter, Marcy. My husband, Travis, runs the front end of the business, leaves early with coffee in a travel mug, and comes home smelling like cedar and dust. He rubs my lower back when the ligaments burn, sets reminders on his phone so I don't forget water, and tells me he'll take the night feedings when the baby arrives. He keeps the peace because he hates fights, but he keeps me first because he knows what a house can do to a family. Marcy is divorced, childless, and permanently in the room. She says she keeps the books for the store, but most days she keeps the temperature of the house. She treats the walls like a ledger. Her mother's kitchen, her father's roof, her childhood bedroom now office. And when she looks at me, I can feel the audit. She worries aloud about outsiders changing the will, about families losing houses because someone marries wrong, about how a guest becomes an owner if you don't draw lines. I don't want to fight over a house. I want a safe place to bring a baby home to and a backyard where Maya can practice cartwheels. My doctor has me on every other week visits for now, with weekly checkups starting at 36 weeks, and I plan our days around naps, preschool pickup, and which route to take if contractions ever come in rush hour. I keep telling myself that if I am careful, kind, and patient, the house will feel like a home again. But even on the days when Denver's light makes the lake look like silver and the air smells like pine, I can feel the ground shifting under the front door, as if the house itself is waiting for someone to claim it. Life inside the house was a puzzle of loyalties, silences, and open wounds. Travis did everything he could to keep the roof steady over us, but no matter how many times he shifted the budget or filled the pantry, Marcy made sure I felt like an intruder. At breakfast, she would comment on how the orange juice used to last longer before extra mouths, or how the mailbox still had her last name on it, like I was stealing space that had always belonged to her. Marisol never missed a beat in backing her up, nodding sharply or adding that some women forget whose house this is. They both had a way of saying this house like it was a crown, heavy with ownership and history. Harold sat through most of it in his recliner, flipping the pages of his newspaper, without looking up, but I knew he heard. Sometimes I wondered if his silence was a shield for peace or a gathering of storms. Maya didn't understand the sharpness in their voices, but she understood tone. She would curl closer to me when Marcy's words sharpened, her small fingers tightening around mine. I tried to keep things normal for her, preschool drop-offs, coloring books in the kitchen, bedtime stories about animals that always found their way home, but I knew she felt the tension even if she couldn't name it. My pregnancy added another layer of vulnerability. At 35 weeks, every appointment mattered. The doctor reminded me to count movements, to watch for swelling, to rest whenever I could. Rest, though, was a luxury in a house where Marcy paced like a restless guard and Marisol shadowed her, both insisting that I was planning to take what wasn't mine. Travis backed me every time. "She's my wife. She belongs here," he would say, his jaw tight, his hand steady on my shoulder. But his loyalty seemed to fuel Marcy's resentment. She had been married once, briefly, and the divorce left her brittle. No children, no partner, only this house and the conviction that she deserved to control it. Her bitterness seeped into every corner. She accused me of manipulating Travis, of plotting to push her out, of waiting for Harold to pass, so I could lay claim to what she called her birthright. Each time I denied it, calmly but firmly. I told her I wanted nothing but stability for Maya and the baby, nothing but peace for our family. She would scoff, mutter under her breath, sometimes loud enough for me to hear. That's what they all say until the will is read. Denver's air in early fall was crisp, cool enough that mornings started with sweaters and evenings closed with the smell of wood smoke. From the porch, I could see kids biking home from school and neighbors planting chrysanthemums in their front yards. Outside, life looked simple, almost idyllic. Inside, though, the house was thick with suspicion and whispered accusations. I carried my daughter and my unborn son in the middle of it, determined to keep my balance, even as I felt the floor tilt beneath me a little more each day. As my pregnancy moved deeper into the 35th week, the atmosphere in the house turned heavier. Marcy's resentment, which had always been sharp, now became deliberate. She brought up the subject of the house almost every evening, circling back to the same accusation that I had married her brother to secure a claim over property that was never mine. She insisted her parents had worked their entire lives for this house, and it should rightfully belong to her, not to a guest who happened to be carrying another child. Her words were cutting, but what made them more dangerous was the repetition. She spoke them like a mantra, loud enough for Harold to hear from his recliner and pointed enough to remind Marisol that her daughter's position was being threatened. Marisol echoed her daughter's narrative with unwavering loyalty. At family meals, she would ask Travis why he didn't protect his sister's future or suggest, with an icy smile, that perhaps I should think about living somewhere more suitable once the new baby comes. Each comment landed like a blow, not just to me, but to the fragile peace I tried to keep for Maya. My daughter had begun asking me why Aunt Marcy never smiled at her and why Grandma's voice always sounded angry. I told her families could be complicated, but even at 5 years old, she sensed that the tension wasn't just grown-up problems. It was hostility directed at us. Travis defended me each time. His voice would rise, steady but fierce, as he told his mother and sister to stop their cruelty. Elena is my wife. This is her home too, he repeated, like a shield against their constant attacks. But while his words meant the world to me, they only seemed to make Marcy more determined. Her life after divorce was hollow, and she poured all of her frustration into painting me as the villain who had stolen her family's love, her house, and her security. She began framing every inconvenience around me. If groceries ran short, it was because of me. If Harold skipped a meal, she claimed I distracted him. If Travis worked late, she said it was my manipulation. It wasn't just bitterness anymore. It was obsession. Harold remained mostly silent, but I noticed the way his eyes lingered on Marcy during her outbursts, the way his newspaper rustled more violently when she accused me, the way he cleared his throat when Marisol piled on. He was a man of few words, but I could sense the storm brewing behind his silence. He had seen enough to know who was tearing the family apart, even if he wasn't ready to say it aloud. By the time I reached the end of the 35th week, the lines were fully drawn. I was exhausted, carrying a child who pressed on my ribs and hips, chasing after a little girl who needed reassurance, and bracing myself daily against words designed to cut me down. The house wasn't just divided, it was turning into a battlefield. Marcy's whispers of control and entitlement weren't just idle threats anymore. I could feel it in her gaze, sharp and calculating, as though she was planning something beyond words, something that would prove her point once and for all. It was a late Saturday morning when the weight of everything finally broke into action. The sky over Denver was unusually clear, the kind of blue that usually made me want to walk with Maya down to the park near the corner. I decided a short errand would be good for both of us. A stop at the grocery store for milk and fruit, a stretch of fresh air to clear our heads. I packed a small tote, slipped Maya's jacket over her arms, and held her hand as we walked toward the front door. My back ached, the heaviness of 35 weeks pressing into my spine, but I kept moving with the steady rhythm of a mother who knows her child is watching her every step. Marcy's voice trailed from the kitchen as we left, something about how outsiders always try to walk out like they own the place. I ignored it. Maya's fingers were warm in mine, and I focused on the small bounce in her steps, the way she hummed a song she had learned in preschool. For a moment, the world outside the house felt normal. But as we reached the edge of the driveway, I caught the sound of an engine revving too quickly for the quiet street. My eyes darted up just in time to see Marcy's scooter swing around the corner. Her eyes locked on me with a look that was more than carelessness. It was intent. In the seconds that followed, my instincts overtook everything. I pushed Maya hard toward the grass, her small body tumbling to safety, even as the scooter barreled closer. The impact caught me squarely, sending a jolt through my side and knocking me against the edge of the retaining wall. Pain seared through my body, sharper than anything I had felt, and then the gush. I knew immediately that my water had broken. Maya screamed, scrambling up with a scrape on her forehead from hitting the wall. Her cry was piercing, desperate, calling for me. I tried to answer, but the contractions ripped through me so suddenly that my voice came out as a strangled cry. Marcy froze for a split second, her eyes wide as if realizing what she had done. Then she gunned the scooter forward and sped away, leaving the smell of exhaust in her wake. Marisol stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed, her face tight with disapproval rather than concern. "Look at you," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Always so dramatic. You think you'll win sympathy with scenes like this." Then, instead of moving to help, she turned back into the house, the door closing with a hollow slam that echoed in my chest. For a moment, I thought I might pass out. My belly tightened in spasms, my breath ragged, my vision blurred. But then I saw Maya's terrified little face, streaked with dirt and tears, and I knew I had to hold on. My body screamed with pain, but I forced my voice to rise above it. "Help, please." My cries cut through the air, carrying across the yard. On the roof deck, Harold had been tending to potted plants, a quiet ritual of his, and he had seen everything. His face, usually calm, twisted with a fury I had never witnessed before. He stormed down the stairs, his phone already in his hand, his voice sharp as he called both the police and emergency services. The sound of his commands, controlled yet urgent, was the first anchor I felt in that moment of chaos. He crouched beside me, his hand hovering near my shoulder, torn between comforting me and not wanting to cause more pain. "Help is coming, Elena," he said, his voice breaking. "You hold on." Maya clung to his leg, sobbing, pointing toward the street where Marcy had disappeared. Harold scooped her up with one arm while keeping his gaze locked on me, his expression heavy with both guilt and rage. For once, the silence that had always defined him was gone. He was no longer a quiet bystander. He was the witness who would change everything. The sound of sirens arrived faster than I expected, growing louder until red and blue lights flashed across the driveway. The paramedics rushed out of the ambulance with practiced urgency, their gear bags swinging, voices clipped and calm. One of them crouched beside me, checking my pulse, while another placed a gentle but firm hand on my belly. "She's 35 weeks, Harold told them quickly, his voice steadier now but lined with rage. "Her water broke. She's contracting already." The little girl hit her head too. His words carried the weight of both a witness and a father trying to hold his family together. Maya was lifted onto the back of a stretcher for examination. A paramedic cleaned the scrape on her forehead, shining a penlight into her eyes to check for concussion. She whimpered and reached for me, and I forced a weak smile. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's right here." My contractions were surging now, each one closer than the last, the kind of pain that swallowed everything. The police arrived almost at the same time, 2 officers stepping out and scanning the scene. Harold didn't hesitate. He pointed toward the road, his voice hard as stone. It was Marcy, my daughter. She aimed that scooter right at them. She knew exactly what she was doing. For a moment the officers exchanged glances, as if the gravity of a father testifying against his own child struck them. Then one began taking his statement while the other noted details of the scene, from the skid marks on the street to the scrape on the retaining wall where I had fallen. Inside the ambulance, Travis arrived in a blur of motion, his truck screeching to a halt just as they loaded me in. His face was pale, eyes frantic, as he grabbed my hand. "I'm here, Elena. I'm not letting go." Harold climbed in beside Maya, refusing to leave either of us. In that cramped, rattling space, we became a fortress of 3 generations clinging together while everything else fell apart. The ride to Denver Health Medical Center blurred in waves of contractions. I could hear the paramedics calling ahead, alerting labor and delivery. 35 weeks, trauma, premature rupture of membranes, contractions every 3 minutes. I knew enough about pregnancy to recognize the urgency. Premature didn't mean unsafe, but it meant every second mattered. At the hospital entrance, fluorescent lights flooded over me. Nurses wheeled me straight into labor and delivery, their voices layering. EVA access, fetal monitoring, oxygen ready. Maya was taken to pediatrics for observation, Harold staying close, his presence like a silent vow. Travis bent over me, his forehead pressed against mine, whispering steady words I could barely process but desperately needed. "You're strong. He's going to be okay. We're all going to be okay." Even through the pain, I caught the shift in Harold's eyes. He had always been the quiet observer, the man who let storms pass. But now he was more than that. He was the voice of truth, the witness who had seen the cruelty unfold and had already chosen which side of justice he would stand on. For the first time, I believed that what Marcy and Marisol had tried to bury with their lies was about to come into the light. The delivery rooms smelled faintly of antiseptic and the metallic tang of equipment. Bright lights glared down as doctors and nurses moved in a precise rhythm, their voices layering over one another. A contraction ripped through me so strong I cried out, clutching Travis's hand until my knuckles turned white. He didn't flinch, his grip firm, his voice steady. "You've got this, Elena. I'm right here." Every breath felt like fire, every push like it would tear me apart, but then came that moment, a wail, high and piercing, cutting through the sterile air. They laid a tiny, squirming baby on my chest. His skin was flushed, his cry raw and insistent. "It's a boy," the doctor announced. "My son, Jasper." Tears blurred my vision as I kissed his damp forehead, whispering his name again and again. Travis leaned over, brushing his hand across Jasper's back, his eyes wet. "He's perfect. He's ours." For a moment, the chaos of the past hour melted into the simple, breathtaking truth that life had entered the room. Meanwhile, Maya was still under pediatric observation. She had a mild concussion scare, but the CT scan cleared her. When they wheeled her in to see me, bandage on her forehead, she climbed carefully onto the bed beside me. Her small hand reached out to touch her brother's blanket. "Mommy, he's loud," she whispered, a hint of a giggle in her tired voice. I laughed through tears, the sound breaking the heaviness around us. Harold stood near the doorway, arms crossed but eyes soft, as if he finally allowed himself to breathe. The doctors explained Jasper's condition. Born at 35 weeks, he was technically premature but strong. He would stay in the NICU for observation for a few days, standard care. I nodded, grateful it wasn't worse. They kept me in for postpartum monitoring, hooked to EVA, and blood pressure checks, while nurses coached me through rest and recovery. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe. But safety was only in that room. Outside, the law had already begun its work. Officers took Harold's full statement in the waiting area, his voice unshaken as he recounted every detail. Marcy's deliberate swerve, my cries for help, Marisol's cruel dismissal. He didn't spare them. He told the truth plainly, the way only a father who had seen enough betrayal could. Travis added his own words, describing months of hostility, the accusations, the endless attempts to paint me as a thief in their home. When the officers left, they promised us updates. They had already broadcast Marcy's description to patrol units. It was only a matter of time. Marisol had been detained at the house for questioning, her indifference noted, her history of siding with her daughter recorded. For once, her sharp tongue couldn't shield her. That night in the hospital, with Jasper asleep in a bassinet beside me and Maya curled against my arm, I let myself close my eyes. I was exhausted, aching, and stitched from labor, but relief coursed through me. My family, the one I had built with Travis, was safe. Harold's quiet strength had finally turned into action, and Travis's unwavering loyalty had carried me through. Justice was beginning to turn its wheels, and though the road ahead promised courtrooms and testimony, I knew we would face it together. 2 days after Jasper's birth, when I was still in the maternity ward recovering, the police returned with updates that changed the shape of everything. Marcy had been found hiding at a friend's apartment on the south side of Denver. She hadn't even bothered to disguise herself, but the friend eventually broke under questioning, admitting she had arrived frantic, muttering about teaching Elena a lesson and insisting no one would believe Elena's version of events. The officers told us Marcy was in custody now, facing charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, her scooter legally counted as such, along with child endangerment and hit and run. The weight of those words was heavy but necessary. Marisol's arrest had already been processed. Though she hadn't driven the scooter, the evidence of her support and her refusal to help when I was lying injured made the conspiracy and aiding charges stick. Her history of verbal cruelty, confirmed by Travis and Harold's testimony, added context. For years she had framed me as the intruder, but now the law saw her for what she was, an accomplice who had enabled abuse until it escalated to violence. Travis stood by my hospital bed when the detectives explained the charges, his arm around my shoulders, Jasper sleeping in the bassinet beside us. He asked sharp, deliberate questions about court dates, protective orders, and how soon we could legally ensure Marcy and Marisol had no access to us again. I watched him transform in that moment. Not just my husband, not just a son, but a protector drawing clear lines between his family and the people who had poisoned it. Harold, usually the quietest man in the room, signed his statement formally, his hands steady. Then, in a move that shocked even me, he told the officers that he was filing for divorce from Marisol. "She is no longer my wife in spirit," he said firmly, "and I'll make sure she is no longer my wife-in-law." His voice carried no bitterness, only resolve. He had seen the truth and would not live another day pretending otherwise. He also instructed his attorney to file eviction proceedings against Marcy, ensuring she could never claim her place in the house again. The court hearings began swiftly. Because I was still recovering, I was granted permission to give my testimony via secure video link. The camera captured me sitting in the hospital's consultation room, Jasper's tiny cries audible in the background as I described the fear of that morning, the deliberate angle of Marcy's scooter, the sting of Marisol's mockery as I lay bleeding and terrified. The prosecutor's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady as she guided me through each detail, building the case brick by brick. In court, Harold and Travis stood together, their testimony aligned, unshaken by Marcy's denials or Marisol's attempts to minimize her role. The evidence was too strong. Skid marks on the street, eyewitness accounts from neighbors who heard my cries, phone records that placed Marcy near the scene, and Harold's eyewitness account. The verdicts came down clearly. Marcy received a 10-year prison sentence without early parole, a punishment that reflected both her intent and her lack of remorse. Marisol was sentenced to a shorter term, with probation to follow, but it was still enough to sever her role in our lives. When the gavel fell, the weight lifted. Marcy was led away in handcuffs, her face twisted with rage. Marisol, pale and silent, accepted her fate without a glance at Harold. Divorce papers and eviction notices followed swiftly, served while they were already in custody. By law and by choice, they were no longer part of our family. I wasn't in the courtroom physically, but when Travis called me afterward, his voice thick with emotion, I could picture it all. "It's over," he said simply. "They can't hurt us anymore." In that moment, holding Jasper in my arms while Maya leaned against my side, I believed him. Justice had not only been promised, it had been delivered. By the time I was discharged from Denver Health, 4 days after Jasper's birth, the air outside felt different. Autumn had settled fully over the city, golden leaves drifting across sidewalks, the chill hinting at snow to come. Travis wheeled me out of the hospital while Maya skipped carefully at his side, bandage still visible, but her smile restored. Harold walked just behind us, carrying the diaper bag with a quiet pride that made him look taller than usual. For the first time in months, the house we were returning to felt like it could truly be ours. The absence of Marcy and Marisol was immediate. No sharp remarks echoing in the kitchen, no pointed stares as I moved through the hallway, no suffocating sense of being an outsider. Their belongings were already boxed up by Harold's instructions, their rooms locked and emptied. The legal notices had been served, and the law ensured neither of them could step foot inside again. What had once been a battleground was now a home, still carrying scars, but open to healing. That first night back, Jasper's cries filled the house in a way that felt sacred rather than exhausting. Travis took shifts without complaint, pacing the living room with our newborn pressed against his chest while Maya whispered lullabies she made up on the spot. Harold joined us in small ways, warming bottles, fixing the wobbly leg on the crib, even reading Maya bedtime stories when I was too tired to move. The silence he had once kept out of caution was now filled with action, each gesture declaring where his loyalty lay. Days later, we hosted a small gathering, not of extended family, but of friends and neighbors who had stood by us quietly during the chaos. The living room glowed with soft lights as people admired Jasper, congratulated us, and filled the house with laughter instead of tension. Maya beamed with pride, introducing herself as Big Sister again and again. For me, the celebration was more than about Jasper's arrival. It was a marker of survival, of justice, of love reclaiming space where fear had lived. Travis stood to thank everyone, his arm wrapped firmly around my shoulders. He spoke about loyalty, about the family you build rather than the one that tries to break you. His voice carried a strength I hadn't heard before, not just protective but resolute. "This is our home," he said, looking at me, then at Harold, then at Maya and Jasper. "And it will never again be poisoned by lies or cruelty." Applause filled the room, but more than that, warmth did. Later, when the house had quieted and Jasper slept between us and his bassinet, I allowed myself to reflect. My journey from the frightened woman who endured daily insults to the mother who now held her ground had been painful, but it had forged something unshakable. Justice had been served not only in court but within these walls. Marcy and Marisol had their punishments, their absence sealed by both prison bars and legal divorce papers, and we had our freedom. As I looked at Maya curled peacefully at the foot of our bed and Jasper breathing softly beside me, I whispered to myself what I knew was true. Family is not measured by bloodlines or old houses, but by the love and protection we choose to give one another. And in that truth, our future in Denver began. Not in fear, but in hope, built on a foundation no one could take from us again. In the weeks after Jasper's birth, our home in Denver finally became a place of peace. Jasper grew stronger each day, his cries giving way to soft coos, and Maya stepped proudly into her role as Big Sister, protective and loving. Travis balanced the family business with fatherhood, more open than ever in showing his loyalty and love, while Harold transformed into the grandfather we had always needed, reading Maya's stories, fixing things around the house, and standing firmly on our side after severing ties with Marisol. For me, recovery was steady. The memories of that terrible morning lingered, but they were slowly replaced by the sounds of my children's laughter and the comfort of a family united. Justice had been served. Marcy was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Marisol faced her own punishment and divorce papers, and both were legally removed from our lives forever. One snowy evening, we gathered for a simple dinner, Travis beside me, Harold raising a toast, Maya grinning at her little brother. "To peace, to love, and to the family that chose each other," Harold said. I looked at the faces around me, felt Jasper's steady breath, and whispered what I knew was true. This is our home, and no one will ever take it from us again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories every week. Your support helps us keep bringing you the stories that matter most.